Hi, my name is Caitlin Edmondson. I'm currently in the bachelor's program for human services, and I'm doing my presentation today for my addictions family counseling course. So the film that I chose is the Basketball Diaries. It is based on a true story about a 16-year-old boy addicted to both cocaine and heroin. And it's a story of loss. It's a story about trauma, of coming of age, peer pressure, abandoned dreams, abandonment, redemption, but ultimately recovery. And if you guys didn't already know the addiction, if you guys didn't already know the definition of addiction, it is an abnormal relationship with an object or an event in an attempt to control that which cannot be controlled. So I chose to focus my presentation around the addictions model, stages 1 through 7, and how I witnessed it coming into play in the film. But also, let's dive in with my client profile. His name is Jim Carroll. He's a 16-year-old high school student at a Trinity Catholic school in New York City. His background: he's an aspiring basketball player with a promising future. He comes from a single-parent household. He has one younger sibling. His hobbies include writing poetry and playing basketball, but our presenting problem is that Jim is addicted to heroin and cocaine, resulting in negative impacts to his academics and his family relationships. Jim's family influence is primarily his mother, his father, and a younger sister. His younger sister wasn't talked about in the film or even present in the film. However, in real life, he does have a younger sister. So just for the sake of the presentation, I'm not going to talk too much about her impact in his life. But his mother was extremely caring, overprotective. She was very high in her faith, very strong in her faith, and in many ways, an emotional anchor. His father was absent, both in the film and in real life. He was emotionally distant, so that also had its impact in Jim's life. Jim's family influence, and at the start of the film we can already see stage 1 coming into effect. Stage 1 is contemplation. Jim's family is unaware of his drug use and how severe it is. Even Jim is not yet aware that his substance use is problematic, but he enjoys being part of the party scene and views drugs as a way to fit in. Which brings me into Jim's social circle, which is a typical case of you show me your friends and I will show you your future. Jim's inner circle is compiled of his 4 best friends who are all on the basketball team with him. He spends a lot of time with them. Unfortunately, they are not the most positive influences. They each engage in alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, sex, and even going as far as robbery. From the very start of the film, we can see how tight-knit this clique is. They spend every moment together. When Jim is not at home, he is typically seen with these boys. And we later see that Jim's deepest connection is to his best friend, Bobby, who is fighting for his life in the hospital. And so we see Jim struggling with the emotions of witnessing his best friend battling this disease. He does have leukemia, and Bobby plays a very, very strong role in Jim's life. He's like the big brother that Jim never had. He's Jim's greatest motivation, and in many ways, he's his safe space. And so we see Jim, who has this very optimistic personality, begin to lose hope when his deepest bond is broken, when Bobby loses his fight to leukemia. And this can be seen as very traumatic in a 16-year-old boy witnessing and experiencing a loss of a friend at that age. And it also is the introduction stage to Jim's substance abuse, as he uses it as a coping mechanism. So not only is Jim facing the emotions of a regular teenage boy, now he is experiencing grief and feeling like he is abandoned and isolated. And it doesn't help that his school influences are not meeting the expectations that educators should. Jim's school environment is also very traumatic. There's no guidance. He has no guidance counselor there that he can speak to. It's very unfortunate that Jim doesn't have the security in his school. He experiences sexual advances from his basketball coach, and he has zero positive reinforcement from his educators. And there's just a very strong lack of supportive relationships. You know, the people that should be guiding him, they're letting him down. And this is where we see stage 2 come into play, called contemplation, where Jim begins to experience consequences of his drug use by falling behind on the team and lacking in his education, and his friendships begin to strain. We start to see the impact of the addictions Jim's mother also becomes increasingly worried. She's observing his changes in the behavior, so the tensions begin to rise in the family unit. Something is wrong, but the two of them together, they're lacking the communication skills. It wasn't easy to watch. You know, he's a 16-year-old boy, and he's experiencing, you know, the loss of his best friend, and he has no one to talk to. He has no outlet, no healthy outlet. If I were to take on this case and Jim were my client, the first things I would notice would be the lack of communication within his family and the role of peer influences, how his friends play the most significant role in his life, and how what they need and what they want take precedence over anything else in Jim's life. Jim is going along with this risky behavior that his friends are influencing because he needs a substitute for the emotional fulfillment that he doesn't have at home. I would also notice the coping mechanisms, how Jim has no healthy habits or no healthy outlet, and his substance abuse is just kind of like a maladaptive coping mechanism to deal with all that emotion. But ultimately it's very traumatic what he's going through, and the film does hint at the underlying trauma, including the abandonment of his father, and, you know, the school expectations. He's only 16 years old, and I think he's lacking just overall positive and healthy influence in his life, and it's all contributing to his substance abuse. And I recognize that some of the potential barriers that I would run into if I were to take this on as a case would be the family dynamics and the communication complexities within the family, the absence of Jim's father and the overwhelming concern of his mother. It would cause Jim to be a little resistant, with the blame shifting from one parent to the other. As a counselor, I would need to navigate these complexities and fostering a safe space so that everyone can be seen and everybody can be heard and understood, so that we can address the underlying issues. Another potential barrier that I would run into, I think Jim would resist treatment, because at this point we see that Jim is not fully recognizing the severity of his substance abuse, and he's feeling kind of invincible at this point, like he's untouchable. So my objective as a counselor would be to employ motivational interviewing techniques to engage Jim and encourage him to consider the benefits of treatment. So going into the analysis of family dynamics within the Carroll family, we have the parental influence, the communication breakdown, the socioeconomic factors, and the peer influence. Jim's relationship with his parents is so complex. You have an absent father and an overbearing mother. Jim has no strong male role model in his life. He lacks the emotional support. He's feeling isolated. The family struggles with open communication. They come from a working class background, and Jim is ultimately resulting in finding his identity outside of the home, which is also causing a huge descent in his addiction. It's at this point where we enter stage 3, which is called the preparation stage. This is where we see Jim starting to get into some legal troubles because of his drug abuse. So he returns home to express a desire to quit his addiction and get some real help. But during this scene, we see that his mother wants to have the conversation to discuss his behavior. Jim acts out, and it turns into a very violent situation. He leads from frustration, and his mother ultimately turns him into the police, hoping to get him off the streets and get him the help that he needs. So, which brings us into stage 4. Jim is now forced into recovery, into an action of withdrawal through positive reinforcement. We finally get a positive influence in Jim's life, one caring adult, which is sometimes all it takes to turn a bad situation into a light one. We see his neighborhood friend Reggie enter into the storyline, and he encourages Jim to keep attending support groups and counseling sessions, get him back into writing. And we see through the assessments of the family dynamic assessment, substance use assessment, cognitive behavioral interventions, and psychoeducation. These are all assessments that are aiding Jim towards his recovery. So we can get him into stage 5, which is maintaining his recovery, so that he might experience setbacks, but ultimately he learns how to manage them. Now, this wasn't included in the film, but my observation from this portion is that the family would start to attend counseling sessions as a unit, so that we can improve the communication skills and support Jim in his recovery. His mother would learn about the addiction and how she can be supportive to her son, and the family would continue to engage in therapy, so that they can set strong boundaries for Jim and ultimately foster a healthier environment for him. We then enter into stage 6, which is the relapse phase, where Jim experiences a relapse. Its main importance is that Jim can recognize his triggers. as a counselor, it would be my duty to make sure that the family reacts with a mix of empathy. We would want Jim to feel like he's being supported. As a unit, they can learn to respond constructively rather than to blame each other and to cause Jim to relapse again. So I would introduce intervention strategies like family therapy, individual counseling, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and peer support groups. Each of these are very strong strategies that Jim could utilize, and it could help him grow his improvement. It could help him grow his communication and rebuild trust with his family. We could get him in on one-on-one sessions. We could address his substance abuse and develop healthier coping mechanisms, and through peer support groups, we could get Jim in a community dynamic and have him grow healthy relationships in his community, and who are going to hold him accountable, so that we can eventually push off into the final stage, stage 7, which is termination. We see this happening at the end of the film, where Jim reaches a stage where he maintains his sobriety for an extended period of time, and he now has a strong support system. So he feels like he is now in charge of his recovery and he has control over it. So as a counselor, I would see a success as the family has transformed their dynamics. They now have an open communication foundation and mutual support within their family, so that they would all be able to celebrate Jim's achievements and recognize the importance of having a strong family unit, and just be supportive overall in his recovery journey. So in conclusion, we see throughout the course of the film how Jim goes from stage 1 in the addiction model to stage 7, through the stages of pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, relapse, and termination. This case study illustrates Jim's journey from addiction to recovery, and it highlights the significant roles of the family dynamic in each stage throughout the process. And as a counselor, I would have implemented family therapy, CBT, and psychoeducation, because I think it's very important that adolescents like Jim are educated on the effects of an addiction, and they know how to go with the emotions and have healthy outlets for their emotions. Here on my final slide, I've composed a list of 4 resources for adolescents, which include substance abuse treatment centers, family therapy programs, and support groups for teens and families. We have the Recovery Village at Baptist Health. We have the New Hope Behavioral Health Center. Third on the list is the Narcotics Anonymous for youth meetings. And fourth is the Celebrate Recovery program at Christ Fellowship Church in Port St. Lucie. All of these resources will be beneficial to adolescent teens who are engaging in substance abuse, or are victims of it, or are struggling to find a way to get from addiction to recovery. But these programs are to help put the power back in their hands, so that they are not victims, but they are survivors, and they are now in control of what happens. They are no longer being controlled by the substance. So I think by utilizing these resources, the teens and their families can navigate the challenges of the addictions, and we can create healthier, more supportive environments for the youth. Thank you.